Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode number 14. Today we're going to start our show with what's going on our farms, and then we're going to discuss frost seeding, clover, and just general winter pasture management. I'm Morgan Hayes. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky in the Ag Engineering Department, focusing on livestock facilities. And in my personal life, I farm about 500 acres with my husband in Boyle County, Kentucky, where we focus on a hay and commercial cattle operation.
And I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering. I focus on precision livestock farming, and I farm in Mercer County, focus on raising registered Angus cattle and some hay production.
Okay, Josh. So we're going to get started today. We've had a good week. Finally, we can say that. We're confident we've had a good, dry couple days here. What have you been doing on your farm?
Well, some of it's been, we've been doing some wood actually. So a lot of trees that were down, been going through and cutting them up, getting them out of the way. Ash trees are still a problem going down places across the farm and on fence lines. So a lot of it's just trying to take care and manage some of those issues. Another one's been, getting ready for weaning. We thought about weaning last weekend. So I mentioned, thought about it. We didn't actually wean. So it's going to be this weekend. It should be great weather, 60 degrees plus. And so we're really looking forward to getting those calves weaned this weekend. Again, still putting on a lot of hay. The grass hasn't quite greened up yet. And so still, this weekend put out a lot of hay and just made sure the animals are generally okay. Just did some general maintenance, fence maintenance. How about yourself?
Yeah, we did some very similar things. We actually did a lot of limb cleanup. We're still working on limb cleanup right now. And it is going to be ongoing for quite a while. We've had quite a bit of winter weather, some pretty aggressive winds.
Yep.
We do had some trees that were down, but we have a lot more limbs that are down. And so just cleaning everything up before stuff starts growing. I know we've been talking about the tornadoes and the cleanup out there. And fortunately, we don't have the metal and that type of debris to clean up out of the fields. But it's also really difficult to get those limbs out once the grass really starts growing. So trying to get as much of that done while it's all visible and easy to see. At least get them piled up. Currently, we're not taking any equipment back to pick up and move those piles. We'll wait till the ground is a little more solid to do that. Maybe the end of this week we'll be able to, but most likely it'll be another couple weeks before we actually get the piles out. But at least that way we won't mow up a bunch of that stuff and deteriorate equipment by chewing up larger pieces of wood with our mower conditioner and other equipment like that. So that's been a big one. We're also feeding hay, just like you said. Still a lot of hay that has to go out. Hopefully taking advantage of a couple dry days here to maybe get some hay not on the concrete. We have access to some of those really nice feeding pads and we use them pretty regularly. But the reality is we want them to move around a little bit more. And if we can unroll some hay when ground is dry and weather's good, we're going to do that. Spread the manure around and also take them off of the concrete for a few days. Their feet really aren't designed to be on concrete continuously, so giving them a little bit of break. And we're getting ready for calving season to start. So our spring herd is going to start calving here about March 15th. And so we're trying to make sure we're paying pretty close attention, especially to our heifer group. Making sure that we identify any animals that are potentially going to calve early in that group. If we can see the signs, hopefully we'll see the signs. Heifers are tricky. Sometimes they give you a lot of indications for a long time, and sometimes you have no indication and it just comes. So we're not sure what it's going to be like. It's never a completely easy guarantee to guess what's going to happen, but really starting to take good looks at those animals right now, getting ready for that season. Unfortunately, we had, with the weather, the last set of storms, we had them break through one of their electric fences.
Uh-oh.
Don't know why a heifer did that. It's possible there was one in there that wasn't. This is my other bred group, not the group that's going to calve shortly, but the ones that are just bred for next fall. Maybe something was open and it got ridden out through that fence, or maybe it was an animal or something else scared it through, or it could have been the weather itself. It's hard to tell.
Sometimes deer.
Sometimes it's deer, exactly. So they took down a single wire interior fence, which moved a cow into the wrong field and had to reassess where that group was supposed to be and convince them that they wanted to go back. But that's just part of having animals, is that they are often in the wrong spot. Fortunately, I got yelled at, but I did not leave the gate open, so I was not at fault for this happening this time. So
That's good.
yeah, I know. I was a little relieved too when I got the call, and they're like, "Did you leave the gate open?" And I was like, "I don't think so." And they're like, and they're like, "Oh no, it really wasn't you. It's okay." Because I was on my way to work when the animals had to get pushed back in. So
Okay.
yeah, I never complain when it's not my fault. So I mean, I complain, but it's not my fault. That's just good.
So, you mentioned, that moving your spring group around. We actually just moved part of our group around to some pastures where I had them off there all winter, and now I put them back out there just to kind of graze it down. I'm going to talk about clover. I actually put some clover out there late January. And so now I'm having to just take that grass on down, so it gives the clover a chance, hopefully, to come up and germinate.
Yeah, it'll probably, for frost-eating clover, the theory is we broadcast it. That means we spread it on top of the ground and we don't drill it into the ground. And legumes and small seed like that generally do well with very little ground cover. They do need ground contact, though. So you did two things probably by bringing those animals on. One, you took down the ground cover, which gives better sunlight for the clover to start. But the second thing it did is it actually puts foot traffic on that seed to actually get it in contact with the soil.
And so I'm having a pretty good little, I'm rotating actually through this pastures. And so it's about 15 acres. I have them on about every 2 days. I'm going to rotate them. But while it's good weather here, I'm really going to have them just focus on eating that grass down, and then probably come back once they get done. A little bit of fertilizer on, because I contacted the guy this morning, and he said if I got urea last week, it'd been $750. This week, they don't have it. And then next week, he said it could have been anywhere from $850 on the optimistic side to $1,000 for the urea.
Yeah, I think fuel prices right now are, it's hard to anticipate what next week is going to look like. It's hard to pay for fuel to drive to work every day, let alone to run equipment. I'm feeling really good. I know we talked about financing last week. I'm feeling really good about purchasing diesel fuel a few weeks ago, even though
definitely
I told you I was still responsible for it being more expensive than it could have been. It's less than it is currently, for sure. So, but I think there is a little bit of banking going on, so that is kind of an interesting thing to consider.
I think DAP and potash were 900 and 1,000 respectively, and they're going up by about $100 if you wait a couple weeks. Is what they're thinking.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, all of them are very energy intensive to produce. An application also takes energy, so there is a lot of money involved in putting in fertilizer. So that is not something to dismiss. So your plan is frost seeding clover and then potentially a little bit of nitrogen just to get it to jump out of the ground.
Yep.
Are you going to apply that yourself, the nitrogen?
I typically apply that myself, just because availability, and usually if I can get on the weekend or have a good weekend to do it, or sometimes an evening, I'll try to get there and do some nitrogen.
How much nitrogen? When you say a little bit, what do you mean?
A little bit. So typically, what I would do is probably about 100 pounds of nitrogen, or 100 pounds of urea would actually give you 50 pounds of nitrogen. So just a little kick. Now, this year, with everything being the way it was, it might be 50 pounds per acre. And, that actually gives you 25 pounds per acre. So that's why I'm saying just a little bit of kick. Will it make a huge difference? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll hopefully give it enough to really get going this spring, give the cows some good grazing opportunities, and take advantage of this good weather. If we keep continuing having good weather, hopefully allows things to thrive.
Sure. Yeah, we are not clover seeding this. I said that, I think, a few weeks ago as well. But we're not going to do any clover seeding. We discussed it, but we had pretty heavy clover stands last year. And the way we rotate, we don't tend to kill off our clover very quickly, so it tends to hold up pretty well. And in fact, in some of our fields that we hay, our clover was more than we really wanted in the hay, which is interesting. It's not a problem from a protein perspective, but it is a problem from a drying perspective. The heavy clover is really hard to get dry, so we're not looking,
especially at first cutting,
especially on first cutting. So we're not really looking to increase clover in most of our fields. We've got one or two where we could probably afford to do it, but for the majority of our fields, other than our sacrifice fields, our clover stands are pretty strong.
And we have some of our fields. We'd fertilized some last year. We had a little bit of clover. I'm not saying it was somewhat a patchwork, and so this year we've really gone almost hog wild, purchasing our clover seed ahead of time, and we're going to put it on at least 100 acres approximately. So we're still spreading clover right now. So we have mom doing a lot of the seeding right now. I'd done the seeding earlier in the winter, and now she's taken over. Just she has the time and availability to just go out there and do. So sometimes those low skill, long hours, just send them out there and just tell them to have fun.
Yeah, and how many acres did you say you're really trying to hit with clover seed this year?
Almost 100. And so we're going, that's a fair chunk of what we have.
Right.
Just trying to make sure we get it established, and even on our pastures, our hay fields and pastures.
Okay.
And so on some of our pastures, we even will use some Ladina clover. If we see it's a fair amount of pressure, but we still want some of that clover in there, we'll go ahead and use the Ladina intermediate white clover.
Right.
And so get some production from that throughout the year. So, but primarily what we've been doing is just primarily red clover.
Okay.
Just primarily red clover. Even on my some of my pastures, just getting some red clover out there because we rotate enough. We're not really putting a high volume of pressure, so we can have them in there, raise it real quick, and then pull them back off. And
Right.
so it's not like we're leaving them out there continually, where they're just going to destroy it and not have any red clover left over.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the keys is that, if you're investing in frost seeding clover, you also want to have a rotational system because clover does extremely well when it's grazed and then rested. It will die if it's under continuous pressure. It's really hard to get it established and maintain a stand if you don't allow some rest on that clover. It's in general for most grasses that's the case. There's a few grasses that really thrive under continuous pressure, but the majority of the things that we want and not weeds like a rest period. So for us, we're not actually doing that. So some of our management things are making decisions about how we're doing our rotation this year, figuring out where we're going to put in some temporary fencing to do some more aggressive rotations. And then we're really working on getting our animal numbers right for the different pastures and different fields on different farms. So sometimes in the wintertime, we compress ourselves down to make sure our animals are where our heavy use areas are for feeding.
Yep.
And then when we go to summer, we have to actually get the right animal units, the animal density for the grazing days that we have on different farms. So we're sort of in that point right now where we're just figuring that out and making sure we get our animals to the right locations.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we kind of do the same because we have probably two primary sacrifice areas, and we have some animals where we've moved them to, a set of heifers we've moved off to the side by themselves. So, and then feed them separately and give them a little bit extra grain. But otherwise, we have two primary for our spring group and fall herds, main cows. They have their sacrifice areas, and once we get done with this, we pretty much just go through and start rotating through different farms. So we're actually going to move the spring group home, hopefully this week, because we calve a little later in March because we got gunshot. We had 6 years ago. We had that good snow in March, that deep snow. We lost 3 calves in that, so I said never again anything before probably March 15th or so.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we have a similar philosophy. We've had some trouble with late February, early March calves. I know a lot of people do target that from a breeding perspective, but we calve later, so it's March 15th to May 15th. And that is kind of an interesting thing because then we have to make decisions about whether to bring animals out onto pasture or hold them up in some of our sacrifice areas where it's easier to check for calves. What we tend to do is we tend to have if we have a good early calving group, that first early calving group will all go out on pasture when grass is good sometime in April. That late calving group might stay on hay a little bit longer so we can keep checking for calves before they go out onto pasture. It's just harder to find young calves sometimes if grass is tall.
Yep.
And so that's sort of our preference is, and when I talk about managing, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like we figure out how many we really want in this spot. Once we hit that number, we start rotating them. And then that rest of those cows, when they finish calving, they move into the other group where there's a little bit more grass available for summer grazing.
Okay. And I guess we do somewhat similar. Just one of our challenges we have with our Well, spring calves is we have a lot more pink eye problems. So we have to really, it comes about June or July, just keep an eye because when the grass does get tall, you do see those problems come sprouting right back up with the pink eye.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a challenge for us, making sure they're close enough to get up and work them.
Yeah, well, fortunately we have working facilities at these places that are pretty accessible for where most of our younger calves are going to be in the spring. We also are pretty diligent about clipping. We clip earlier than a lot of people do on our pastures. We're definitely not a one clip summer. We definitely clip at least twice and often 3 times during the summer, which a third clipping is, to be completely honest, expensive to run, but family members that own some of the land would prefer it to look nice, and so they like it clipped anyway, and it's not a problem. On a drought year, that second clip will get held back if we think we're coming into a drought, and we'll just do 2 clippings. But if grass is good, if rain is good, we'll do 3 clippings on a lot of those pastures.
We try to, adjust for these weather, the changing weather. And I think, I was looking at the latest forecast, they're going to say warm and dry, I think is what they're saying for this summer. As far as the forecast, we have to just wait and see what that actually means.
Maybe we need to have Matt Dixon back on here in another week or 2 to talk about it. We definitely have some interesting weather coming, and we've had a lot of very wet seasons repeatedly in the last few years, and so I really hope it's not a drought year, but I think we have to anticipate that it might not be a wet year. The odds of it being another wet year
are fairly slim. 2018 was wet. This year is wet.
Seem unlikely.
Last year was wet. Yeah.
So we don't know. And similar to you, and between that and fertilizer prices and people being afraid to put on fertilizer, it could be a very interesting summer in terms of getting the production we need out of the ground. If we don't put nitrogen down early to get it up and going, it could be a challenge. But to be completely honest, from an economic standpoint, unless hay prices do something to get drastically higher, and I don't see that happening. There's too many people selling and clearing out hay right now at very low prices because they had abundance last year. I can't see how hay prices are going to get high enough to justify the fertilizer costs right now.
Yeah, and that's pretty much been my concern. So we actually have a little bit of buffer. So we actually have one barn that's almost completely full still. And so we're looking at that, considering, we'll just hang on to that. If we don't fertilize, hopefully that would be able to take us, if we do have a drought year, we could start feeding hay in October and utilize the hay that's in that barn initially. Yeah. And so if there is, kind of our buffer capacity, usually we try to have at least a month buffer capacity.
That's a good idea. Some people will buffer a lot of hay. I don't like to have too much extra, but depending on how much we clear out of some of our barns, we've considered purchasing hay that people are getting rid of at the end of the season to fill up part of a barn. As long as it was stored inside last year and it's stored inside, and we can immediately put it back into indoor storage, it's not a terrible option to have 2-year-old hay. We feed anyway. We have good mineral programs. We're fairly comfortable that we can get the animals where they need to be with 2-year-old hay. I don't like to go to 3-year-old hay. I don't want anything to sit that long, but it may be a strategy this year, a risk management strategy to consider. So frost seeding clover is a risk management strategy. Figuring out if we're going to apply fertilizer, a risk management strategy, and then, of course, how much hay we keep stocked up. Backstop, I guess, a backpiling of it.
Right. How much do you keep on reserve for yourself? Because we, like I said, we never know what's going to take place. This year was, moderate winter, I'd assume. But, what takes place next year?
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, that I mentioned before that we have some of our animals are going to get hay unrolled, and that's also part of our strategy, is to move some hay around and move some manure around, knowing that we're not going to be applying fertilizer at the rates we normally would. Trying to get that manure spread where we have some stockpiled. And if we do get a drought, we do have an area that we have a pond that is sort of like a manure storage, but not really, but it tends to build up some nutrients in it, and it needs cleaned out. So that could be a strategy this summer. If we have a drought, some dry weather, we may empty that pond and put those nutrients back onto our ground, try and utilize them in a year where fertilizer is going to be pretty expensive.
And another thing you mentioned at manure, like when we have a couple pastures, we actually don't put any clover seed on, just because that's where we also spread our manure. Because we go through from the hay pads to spread our manure there, And typically when we spread that manure, whatever seed was there, it seems to really take off
Right.
once you spread that manure out on that pasture.
Yeah. So that's one of our goals, is to get some manure out in the spring. Not anywhere that we're planning to bale for hay necessarily, because it can be pretty hard to have those clumps working their way back in. And at the end of the day, soil is it holds botulism, but there are some things that end up in your hay bales if you really have manure and a lot of the dust and dirt from the manure, and all the nutrients working their way back up into the hay bales. That's not the goal. So primarily spreading it on pasture land that needs the extra nutrients.
Yeah, and even we're talking about the price of fertilizer being $1 a pound for almost $1 a pound essentially for nitrogen and all the other ones. So it really makes a lot of sense to reutilize that manure this year, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of our plan right now, is to utilize nutrients from animals rather than fertilizer to the best of our ability, to keep his costs as low as possible, but also to recognize that our hay production is going to be lower this year as a result of it, and that we're going to have to be pretty strategic and smart about getting hay baled, and also purchase hay at the right prices early, potentially.
And you guys feeling pretty good? You do some of the bale grazing, feeling good about the distribution of that manure, as opposed to
feeling okay about the distribution of that manure. That's a rented piece of land. It's certainly not one that would ever get fertilizer. That plus clipping plus a rotational system is going to improve the nutrient load in that field. That field is a little tricky because it has some hedge apples in it and some other things that make it harder to manage as a field. But I feel better that we're getting some nutrients out into that field that will hopefully, over the long run, help the areas that are getting better sunshine create better grasses, while parts of that field are shaded pretty heavily and won't ever really develop the way they need to. So it's not perfect. Nothing about rented land is perfect. It's very hard to justify improvements on rented land. It's very difficult to make gains, and it's very hard to spend money on it, especially when you don't have a long-term lease. In theory, you could throw some money at nitrogen, but to throw money at potash, or it's very hard, because those are multiple year investments when you put some of those fertilizers down. So
even lime, I guess, because it's multi-year as well.
Exactly. So unless the landowner is interested in doing improvements and cost sharing or doing something like that, it's a very hard one. We have other land that we bale hay on shares, and we share cost, and I don't feel at all bad about that, because I feel fairly confident about the security of that land agreement that we have with the landowner. And because we share costs as well, I also feel a little bit better about that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if you have that shared risk between the two individuals.
Absolutely. So that's one of those where we would consider doing some lime this year, and we are still looking at doing a couple more soil tests on that piece of land. They probably won't get full fertilizer. They have, though, the last 2 years. So some of that land that's on shares is actually in pretty good shape from a nutrient standpoint. And this year we'll just focus on getting the lime right.
Okay.
So. And with that, I guess let's just finish up with what's happening for the next few days on the farm next week, because it looks like we have a few more good days.
So, we're going to talk about, maybe some miracles happen, trying to do a lot of soil sampling. So if we can do all the soil sampling and over the weekend, that'd be ideal. If it's for these drier days. May try to throw out a little bit of DAP on some fields, just a little bit. Just thinking about it, I have to still do my budgeting for the year. Also, might still working on equipment, trying to move animals around. Might move the spring herd to the home farm, and some of if we wean, that'll also be another complication for us, moving animals around or getting animals weaned. So we do fence line weaning, so getting everybody by that fence line, have them all yelling and screaming, and just let them do their thing for a while.
Yeah.
How about you?
We also have weaning as a goal. This weather is just perfect for it. We have to get rid of our older weaned group out of the barn so that the younger ones can go into the barn at the point of weaning. So that will take precedent, is finding the right way to sell our calves. I know we spoke about that a couple weeks ago as well. That's definitely a priority right now, is to get the right price. We were fairly confident about our pricing and everything else, and then the markets have been a little bit wishy-washy. Prices don't seem to be terrible, but the war between Russia and Ukraine is very clearly going to affect grain markets,
Yes.
fuel markets, and as a result, it's going to affect the cattle market. So I don't know what that actually means in the long run. I don't know what the prices are going to be. We're still trying to figure out exactly what the market actually looks like right now to make sure that we're getting a fair price. And we can hold back some of our animals. We do have enough land base. We can do it if we need to for a few weeks on grass, but we don't want to if the prices are where they were a week and a half ago.
Yes, it'd be worth it to go ahead and get some of that capital.
Absolutely.
Cash
And the
flow.
younger calves, we may just wean for 45 days, 30, 45 days until they're on feed good and sell them right away. Because right now prices are very strong on those lightweights.
Yep.
Traditionally, we hold them till sometime in late May, but we probably will not do that this year.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. I don't want to assume that I know what we're going to do this year because the market has been very
It's
dynamic.
It's very volatile right now. It's very volatile. So it's up and down, and we just have to wait and see, and hopefully do the best we can to get some decent prices for these animals.
Absolutely. So that's our plan is we're going to try and sell some calves. We're going to try and wean some calves. We're going to keep feeding hay and
Spreading manure this weekend, or
that's an interesting question. We have one tire that we blew last fall on the manure spreader, and we've purchased the new tires, but we haven't had it installed. We haven't taken it up to a tire shop that can mount that size tire. So unless we take that up here in the next day or two, we won't get it spread. But it might be a good consideration that maybe we should think about that if we can find some time to run it up there and get that done tomorrow.
that's but I said all this, but I forgot I have a lawnmower clinic this weekend, so I'm gonna be working on lawnmowers with the Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering group up here. So
Oh, Josh, you're going to have a hard time sampling soils from Lexington. It'll be very tricky for you, but good luck with that.
I'll do the best I can. Yeah.
I'm sure the students will do a good job for you, so.
But that's pretty much all that's going on this week. So
Sounds good. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
thank you.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.